Our speaker tonight is Lark Rodman. I have lived down the street from her grandparents for most of my life. They're right here, and they are global citizens, so I'm not surprised that Lark is following in their footsteps. She studied global perspectives in college. She worked for Google for a while, but she decided that she wanted to help create a good future for more than just herself. She wanted to create a future for Indians in the third world. So bless her heart. So please help me welcome Lark Rodman.
We're going to take a minute to switch the computers over. Thanks for coming, everyone, especially given the weather tonight. And thanks to Dirk for hosting this Green Speaker Series. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about a project that I've been working with in India for much of the last year. Just the other day, it's a reforestation project, and I'll start out by telling you a little bit how I became involved with them. Just the other day, I was going through some papers at my grandmother's house that I had put together when I was, or they were things I had made when I was 5 and 6 years old, and this is what we found. The whole folder was filled with similar, crayon drawings that said things like, happiness is going to the rainforest, and happiness is saving the earth, and they were filled with pictures of trees and animals. And my grandmother said, look at this, you knew what you wanted to do before you could even write. My path from there to where I ended up here in India wasn't exactly straight. I wasn't really involved in forestry or even sustainability that much until fairly recently. It was something I'd been interested in, but like Dirk said, I majored in global perspectives at Principia College, which kind of fit into my world outlook. I love to travel. But then I went on and got my master's degree in Spanish through Middlebury College and ended up doing IT work for Google, which was a great job for a few years, but I worked remotely from home and was sitting in front of a computer all day, not working with anyone else, and really realized that wasn't a sustainable job for me, kind of emotionally, or as, I was really committed to community development also. And so as my contract ended with Google, I started thinking about what am I going to do next, and began looking at other jobs, but really it became easy to get sucked into the focus of what kind of job do I need to create a future for me, what kind of job is going to provide me with money, and I became more and more discouraged and uninspired by that job search. And kind of in the midst of that, I remembered a conversation I'd had with a friend a number of years ago, and she'd said, I just went on this study abroad program, and after it was over, I was traveling down south and ran across this organization called Sadhana Forest. I just stayed there briefly, but I think it's a project that you would love, and if you ever get to India, you should go check it out. And India is a country I've always wanted to go to and hadn't made it there, and thought, my contract's up, I'm in between jobs, maybe this would be a good opportunity just to go check out what they're doing. And speaking of eco-villages, the organization has also kind of created an eco-village that volunteers flow through, so their workforce is entirely volunteer-driven, and that was something I was interested in too, learning more about living in an intentional community that really focused on sustainable development and, like Dirk said, creating futures for the entire community and also for those who are part of it and who live around it. Arriving in India, I had barely been in touch with the organization. I shot them off an email and said, hey, I'm going to come over and check it out. I really didn't know whether I would go and volunteer there for 2 weeks and then come home, if I would travel and just check it out while I was doing that. But I showed up, and I had a 6-month visa and ended up staying there for the entire 6 months. I really loved what they were doing, and got pretty involved in it. But going in, I knew very little about reforestation in the developing world. But what I learned pretty quickly is that it's, the challenges that most people in the developing world face today are food security and clean water security. We hear about lots of other challenges, we read about it in the news, but when it really comes down to the local people being able to survive and thrive, they have to have sources of clean water and a source of food. And deforestation has really undermined the people's ability to provide for themselves and provide for their families. Water, especially in India, in a country where it's dry most of the year and they rely on a monsoon that takes place once, maybe twice a year. Having a clean water supply is really important. And so really deforestation, we think of it as an environmental issue, but it's focuses on land degradation, but it really is a social issue as well, because as people degrade the land that they live on in rural areas, they end up having then to move into city slums, and it perpetuates this cycle then of overpopulation, overcrowding in the cities, and poverty. So what our organization focuses on, of course we plant trees, but we're also focusing on community development and educating the local people in how they can care for trees themselves, plant trees themselves, and thus be able to care for their families and stay on the land. Examples of what much of India looks like, and when people leave their homes, they end up migrating to, outside on the outskirts of cities and living in homes like this. So part of what's led to deforestation specifically in India is 60% of the population is involved in agriculture, and that's led by a high unemployment rate, a lack of job opportunities, intense overpopulation. India's population is 1/6 of the entire world's population, and they're 1/3 the size of the United States. There are over 1.2 billion people living in India. So there's a huge demand on the land from unsustainable agricultural practices. The first kind of era of deforestation in India took place soon after colonization by the British. Colonization kind of, by definition, is the colonizers coming in and, basically, taking all the resources they can for their own gain and not reinvesting it back into the country. So India was pretty exploited during colonization, and that just continued during World War II and also after independence, as the population primarily just grew by leaps and bounds, and took a heavy toll on the land. So that's kind of the context that I was arriving into. And so here's India. Our project is located in the south, right, just south of Pondicherry. So it's very close to the equator, very hot, tropical environment. It's dry most of the year. We get one major monsoon in the summer and then a smaller one in the fall. Last year we missed both of the monsoons, so we've definitely had challenges because of changing weather conditions and weather patterns too. This is just a close-up of where we're located. Our project is right over here. So the organization was actually started by an Israeli couple, Aviram and Yori Rosen. This is a photo of their family soon after they first came to India. And it's funny, they came to India almost sort of with the same impetus that I did, where Aviram was a very successful psychologist in Israel. They had a big family there, life was good, they were making a lot of money, but they both felt kind of this pull to do something more with their lives and give back in some way. So they sold their house, compiled all of their savings, and just moved to India with their older daughter. Their younger daughter wasn't born yet. So they just kind of showed up in this township called Oroville, which is also near Pondicherry, and talked to. Oroville is an international community that has a lot of kind of ecological-based projects, and so they were checking it out to see if there was something they could become involved with, and learned that reforestation was a huge, or deforestation had been a huge issue there, and they really needed. There were a few sacred groves of tropical dry evergreen forest still there, but they were becoming really degraded and kind of into thorny thickets. So they decided that rather than joining up with another project, they were simply just going to start a new one. And the township of Oroville gave them 70 acres of land, a little bit outside of the town, and said, have at it, it's yours. To do, hopefully to grow trees on, but good luck. And the very first night they were there was no infrastructure, no housing, no running water. A volunteer showed up and said, hey, we heard there's a new project in Oroville, can I help? And they said, we have nowhere for you to sleep, we have nowhere for you to use the bathroom, but hey, we'll take all the help we can get. So that volunteer stayed, and there hasn't been a single night since then that a volunteer hasn't been staying in the community, and that was 10 years ago. So the primary goal of Sadhana Forest is replanting tropical dry evergreen forest, which is the native forest cover of that area. It's important not just because of the trees are good, but tropical dry evergreen forest has a huge biological diversity. There are over 160 woody species, but if you include vines and herbaceous species, that number goes up close to 1,000. And 600 of the species have recorded either nutritional, medicinal, religious uses. So it's a huge resource for the people. And also, the lack of forest has meant that because we're really close to the coast, when we do get the monsoon, without any trees, all of the soil is just carried off into the ocean. So there were huge problems with erosion. In general, it's a pretty low shrubby forest type. Most of the trees don't grow taller than 6 meters. But still just very important to the region. And this kind of shows on map, it's not a huge, it doesn't cover a huge area, just this strip right along the coast here is native tropical dry evergreen forest. That's where it traditionally was, and now only 0.01% of it still exists. So it's almost completely non-existent today, except in these little isolated, either sacred groves or degraded sort of shrubby areas. So when Aviram and Yuri first came to the area, this is what it looked like. They described it as looking like a moonscape. It was just incredibly eroded, no trees anywhere, and no topsoil. And this is what it looks like today, 10 years later. It's still going to take probably another 20 to 30 years before the forest is viable on its own and can continue to grow without human intervention, but it's getting there. This area, this particular part of the forest was called Challenge Hill because when they first started planting there, some of the local people came in and said, you will never get anything to grow here. And they took that as a challenge and said, okay, we'll see about that. And today it's getting there. Since the project started, we've planted over 280,000 trees. and the water table's risen over 20 feet. And that's in large part because initially, more than just planting trees, we had to control water runoff. And so Aviram used to go out and walk walk around the land and watch when it would rain where the water would flow and where it would run. And so we built, this was before I was there, but they built over 20 kilometers of earth dams and bunds to collect the water, and that was what caused the water table to rise. And then we were able to start planting more native trees, because initially we were just planting foreign exotic species like Australian eucalyptus, because the soil was so degraded it couldn't handle planting native species. So this is an example. When it rains, it pours. And this is examples of some of the earth dams and mud pools that we've created there to help hold the water in so that it will gradually absorb into the soil over the season and not run off. So this is actually the same mud pool, but later in the season, after we've been using the water and it's sipped in. And the earth walls that you see there have all been constructed by volunteers. So I'll run through a few slides here just of what kind of a typical day looks like in terms of the actual reforestation work. We haul water up from the mud pools, and then usually take it by bike into the forest, collecting a lot of mulch from out in the forest. And this is how we plant trees. You can kind of see here, initially when they started planting, they weren't having a lot of success. Our survival rate now is between 80 and 90%, and it doesn't even dip below 70% in the most degraded soils. But we learned that naturally when a seed falls from a tree and starts to grow, it doesn't usually fall into a hole. Usually it falls on top of the earth, and then sediment and leaves and mulch build up on top of it. So we thought, maybe we should dig these trenches and build soil on top of where we're going to plant the tree. In that way, the water can collect when it rains in the trench around the tree, and the roots will extend out there, but the tree is actually growing out of a higher pile of dirt. And that we found was really effective. So if you go into an area where there are new trees planted, it looks, you see all these kind of strange little mounds with little trees poking up out of them. So here's just running through the process of tree planting. And in a minute, I'll tell you what the plastic water bottle is doing in there. And then we always cover the soil with leaves to try to prevent evaporation. So here are a collection of water bottles, and this is one of the projects that I kind of headed up while I was volunteering there. Because we missed the monsoon last year, we had to come up with a way to water the trees. And you guys can pass this around if you'd like. Here's an example of it. So we began experimenting with a wick irrigation system. And so here's kind of the process that I would go through in creating one of these bottles, which we plant with the trees. First, I would start a fire in one of our stoves and heat up a metal rod in it. And we're planting, several hundred trees a week, each one with its own bottle. So we had to have, quite a system going here to make that many bottles every day. So burning a hole in the bottom of the water bottles. And all of these bottles are donated from the local communities, so it's keeping the bottles also out of just the trash heaps in the local villages. We'll string a rope through the bottle from the top and knot it off and seal it with an epoxy resin. And then stick this plastic piping on the end, and that's just to assure that as the rope biodegrades, the water will continue to get directed at the roots of the plant when we place the bottle with the tree. So essentially what happens with these bottles is when we plant the tree, we plant the bottle along with it and use the rope to wrap kind of around the roots. Then every 3 to 7 days we'll go through the forest with buckets of water and refill the bottles, and you can control the flow of the water by how tightly the lid is screwed on. So if the tree doesn't need to be getting a ton of water, you can screw the lid on pretty tightly and it will just drip out very slowly. And what this does is it allows the trees to be babied a little bit, especially since we didn't have enough water during our growing season. And it completely eliminates loss of water to evaporation, and so it also eliminates salt deposits where we're planting the trees. And this photo is kind of fun, just it shows after I've been working on this system for a couple of months, one day these two men showed up in our community and someone introduced them to me, and they said, oh, we're here for the certificate in wick irrigation. And do you know who's our trainer? I thought, well, I guess that's going to be me. So I spent one full day working with them, teaching them how to make these bottles, and then they spent the night and spent the next day out in the forest learning how to plant them in our system for planting trees. And they were part of a village organization from like 3 or 4 hours away. And they were going to go back and train 3,000 farmers in this technique, which was kind of exciting for us as we've been sort of developing it and perfecting it over the last year or so. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about too is what has made our project so successful, because there are reforestation projects around the world, many organizations in India, and why I've been pretty committed to this one. As I said, there's been a steady flow of volunteers for the last 10 years, and today we're getting over 1,000 volunteers a year. So it's become a really popular program, and it's because they take a really holistic approach to reforestation and sustainable living. They know that it's not just about planting a tree or even, bringing a local in to teach them how to plant a tree. It's about living in a way that nurtures community and the commitment to creating a future in which people will care about trees and will care about the environment. So they've set up kind of a community that lives as sustainably as possible. As Abhidharma, our director, says, why reforest with our hands when we're deforesting with our mouths? And not just our mouths, but in the whole way that we live. So there's many guidelines set up that promote this way of life there, one of which is we eat a completely vegan diet, and we cook all of our own food over wood-burning stoves. And some people say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are you cooking with wood if you're planting trees? But wood is actually a renewable resource if it's harvested correctly and sustainably. And what we've done is developed these stoves called rocket stoves, which burn wood incredibly efficiently so that we can cook a meal. We've got 4 of these stoves in the kitchen. We can cook a meal for well over 150 people using only a couple of pieces of wood in each stove. They've been really effective for us. We're working on introducing them to the local villages as well, and still perfecting the design. We're finding that the clay is cracking quite a bit still, but hopefully as we perfect it more, we'll be able to spread these out through the villages there and also in the other places that our organization will be working in. So here's one of the other stoves that we use to cook over. So as I mentioned, water is a huge issue there. We have to conserve as much water as possible, and the main way we do that is by not using running water and making sure that all the water we do use, that nothing is lost. So this one pump provides water for our entire community, which can be over 100 people at times. We use it for cooking, showering, laundry. The only thing we don't use it for is drinking water, which we have a filtration system that we use electricity for, since clean water is very important for drinking. So for things like hand washing, this is what we call a hand washing station. The big silver bucket is full of water, and when you want to wash your hands, you go over to that bucket, take the dipper on the top, scoop a very small amount of water out, and pour it into this silver cup here, which has a tiny hole poked in the bottom. So a trickle of water runs out of that. You wash your hands under it. That's a bottle of soap on the right, which you can squeeze a bit onto. And as you'll notice, all the water falls down onto this cement slab, which is slightly tilted, runs into this ditch here, and feeds our banana trees. So none of even the gray water is going into the food that we're growing. And this is the system we have set up for dishwashing. It's in between meals right here, but when we're done eating, everyone takes their own plate and utensils and comes and scrubs them off with ash from our stoves with a coconut scrub, and then dips them successively in 3 buckets of water, and then leaves them to soak in this final bucket, which has a solution of vinegar and iodine in it. This is an example of our showers. So if you want to take a shower, you would come to one of the stalls, grab the bucket that says shower on it, haul it quite a long way up to where that water pump is, manually pump your water. You probably will only fill it about half to 3/4 full, otherwise you'll have a really hard time carrying it back to your shower. And then use that little dipper again to dump water over your head. And again, the cement slabs angle the water so that it's running off to food trees to water them. This is similar where we do our laundry. Again, it's hauling the buckets up to fill them with water and doing the laundry by hand here using biodegradable soap so that the gray water can be used for watering plants. This is the water tank that's used to water the trees in the compound. And since we use this water, the entire tank of water every day for the watering, it gets refilled every day, so in the meantime we use it as a swimming pool. So the little electricity we do have, we get from a 5,000 watt solar system. In general, the electricity is used just to power lights in our main hut, so our eating area. We get about 4 hours of electricity a day that we can use to charge computers, camera batteries, but that's depending on cloud cover too. On some days, if it rains for a week, we don't have electricity for a week.
But we've got rain.
And also on Fridays, we have a film club where we invite the local community over to watch a movie and have a free meal. And on those days, we also don't have electricity because we have to save it all for running the projector. So in order to use as little electricity as possible, we have to come up with some creative solutions. This is a bicycle blender. So in the kitchen, all of our blending needs for cooking and then also for creating fertilizers for the plants are made on a bicycle blender. It's kind of hard to see, but the blender piece sits into that white part. You pedal and blend what you need. We try to create as little waste as possible, so we do have a recycling system, and almost everything is reused. One person has a job of every day going through emptying the recycling and sorting it and figuring out what its next purpose or use could be. And that system of recycling also includes the bathrooms. As I said, we try to have absolutely nothing go to waste. We have 16 dry composting toilets in the community. And dry composting means we have to separate solid from liquid waste. So essentially the way the system works is you have one hole for your liquid waste, which would be this one, and one hole for your solid waste, which is the one in the back, and a little pan there in case both need to happen at once. And we use no toilet paper, so we're completely on the Indian system, which involves using water, so there's a bucket of water with a dipper in there. And in the hole for solid waste, when you're done, you just shovel out some sawdust over it and leave it. And it's someone's job every day to go in and stir the poo, which everyone kind of jokes that that's the worst job to have, but it's actually, because the liquid and solid are separated, there's really no smell involved at all. And it enables us to use the compost a lot faster. That blue bucket that's sitting back there, those are down beneath the ground there when they fill up. We pull it out, let it sit there for 6 weeks, and then it goes into a compost pile where it sits for another 6 months, and then it's ready to be used in the forest. And compared to composting toilets that include liquid waste, that has to sit at least a year. And the liquid waste also does not go to waste. It's collected, and we use urine for ammonia, both for plant fertilizer and for cleaning the bathrooms. It seems kind of extreme, but as I found, it's amazing what we're capable of getting used to. So that's actually our compost pile. So all of the compost sits there for about 6 months, and then we haul it out into the forest. This is just kind of an example of what the living quarters are like. This is where I lived while I was there. All of the housing materials are local and native. We get people from the local communities come in to help construct the houses. They've tried to train volunteers in the past on how to do it and found that every time they built a hut with volunteer labor, it fell down. So for the time being, we still do hire people from the local community to come in and build our housing for us. This was my room, so as you can see, it's pretty basic. Completely open, which is nice because it gets really hot, so you want as much breeze as possible. An example of the dormitories where people have these individual kind of curtained off rooms. And then the people who are living there longer get their own private hut, so there are about 20 of these thatch huts around. So what we're moving towards now, because Sadhana Forest India has been so successful, in 2010 we started a sister project in Haiti, and that was soon after the earthquake. And they won I think it was in 2010, they won the Humanitarian Water and Food Award for their work both in India and Haiti. And the goal is to get Sadhana Forests started up in as many countries as possible. And our next step is moving to Kenya. So just this past July, a group from Sadhana Forest went over and purchased 30 acres of land in the Samburu district near Marlal and Kasima, so it's going to be like right there. And right now we're working on getting the funding to get it started up. We raised the money to buy the land, we put in a bore well and got a vehicle, but now it's just a matter of building some structures there so that it can open up to volunteers and we can start a nursery. So this is the area that we're going to be moving into. It's Samburu land covers, it's a huge area up there, like 21,000 square kilometers, and 73% of the population there live below the poverty line, and only 15% of the people have access to safe drinking water. So it seemed like a good place for our next project. And here's the actual plot of land that we bought, that green square there. And you can see that there's kind of a road running along it there. We picked this piece of property because it's right adjacent to the road that runs to market. And so when the local villagers go to market, they'll be able to see the work that we're doing there. So because it's a fairly small piece of land, the goal here won't be so much to just reforest that land, but to have it be sort of an example as a place that people can come and learn about the different types of drought-resistant food-bearing trees that they can plant in their own compounds. And so it will create some shade along the road, and hopefully as people rest in the shade, we'll be able to strike up conversations. And we'll also start a nursery there where we're hoping to be able to provide between 150,000 and 250,000 seedlings a year to individual farmers and families for them then to be able to plant in their own farms and their own compounds and care for themselves. And our focus here really will be on food-bearing trees because access to food is so difficult. This was the group that went over this summer, the directors, Aviram and Yori, and a few volunteers. And they purchased the van and got to work on kind of building the infrastructure over there. And we're hoping within the next year to have the funding to really be able to move ahead there in Kenya. This was Aviram meeting with some of the local villagers, and he's already created a lot of connections with the tribes there. And they're really gung-ho to be involved and to participate. We've teamed, Sadhana Forest is a registered nonprofit in Kenya now with the Kenyan government. And we've teamed up with the Greenbelt movement, which was started by Wangari Maathai. So we have some good partnerships, a really good community that feels incredibly welcoming over there. So we're excited about this next step, and I'm returning to India next week, but I'm hoping that if the funding comes through, I'll be able to go over to Kenya at some point next year. Again, meeting with local villagers. So that's pretty much what I had prepared. I guess the one other thing is that I've been thinking about that what's made Sadhana Forest so successful in all three of the projects that we're starting is the idea that they're coming into these areas permanently. Like so many large NGOs that are employing people go into areas, especially like Haiti. They stay for a couple of years, they employ a lot of people, but then once things seem to have settled, the funding dries up and they leave, and then it just leaves the people in a tougher position even than they were in previously. And so Sadhana Forest, really their goal is when we start up these projects, we're creating a permanent community where we are, whether it's really starting an eco-village that's open to international volunteers and locals, or whether it's on the large scale like in India or smaller scale so far in Kenya and Haiti, that the focus isn't on employing local people, it's on education and living sustainably, because that's really going to be what provides a better future, not just providing someone a job for a couple of years. And so we really, everywhere we go, we've focused on a gift economy and the importance of service and of community, and that's really what has drawn me to the organization. And what I've loved so much about working with them is that holistic aspect of it. And this was a quote from one volunteer who came through Sadhana Forest, that may there be many more forests to grow people. So our goal hopefully will be someday to have Sadhana forests in every country around the world to grow people. Thanks.
happy to answer questions.
So are there any animals left in any of these forests, or have people wiped them all out?
We've seen a return of birds and reptiles. All of the species of snakes, 14 species of snakes have come back. Many species of birds, but because, where we are, it's just a 70-acre parcel of land that we've reforested. And there are a few other projects that have started the process as well, but because they're isolated, it hasn't really opened up corridors for animals, like especially mammals, to come back because there really isn't enough space and they can't get from one patch of forest to the other. So we haven't really seen a return of mammals, but hopefully one day that could happen. Yeah.
What kind of budget does a community like that require for a year?
What we're looking at for Kenya, our startup cost and what we've looked at in order for us to operate for the first 2 years there is just under $300,000. And it's, it takes a while to raise that amount of money when it's, coming from small donations, but really that's incredibly low for what we're able to accomplish. And that's primarily because it's based entirely on volunteer labor. We don't have any full-time employees.
So I guess my next sort of take on that would be, how do you raise the money? And if there aren't any, is there like a salaried worker in the United States or something like that, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's partly volunteers who, like me, who've had a great experience there, coming back to their home countries and talking about it. That's one of the things I've been doing. I've been back from India for 6 months, and I had committed to raising a certain amount of money for them while I was back here. The director spends a lot of his time doing fundraising and grant writing. So we get a lot of turnover because it's volunteer based. So he's the one who primarily is in charge of that, finding the larger donors, and then we look to volunteers to raise smaller amounts. And the director travels quite a bit to Europe and to the United States to give talks and to meet with people. But it's primarily through word of mouth and small donations.
So, did you work at all with the local people, more like a fair trade system, or just like get their economy going as well?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's been a little bit controversial, not so much in India, more in Haiti. In India, there is a lot of participation from the local people. We've gotten a lot of IT workers who come and are fed up with working with computers and are just like, we want to live like our grandparents did. And then other kind of less privileged villagers who are coming there just as a step up. We are really involved with the local schools, and school groups come out on the weekends and on Fridays. In terms of kickstarting the local economy, because our focus is so much on service and a gift economy, it's less about putting money into the community as putting skills in the hands of the workers and providing them options like the rocket stoves and the wick irrigation system, so that they're able to have alternatives to degrading the environment. And so we're looking in that direction as that being more of a long-term solution than sinking money into the local communities. But in Haiti, that's been really rough because they're so used to getting aid, especially since the earthquake. They're looking at every NGO coming in, and it's like, where's the money? How are you going to pay us? Why would we volunteer for you? That's just a form of slavery. So it's been a lot tougher there. But hopefully as the years pass and they see that we're there to stay and are making a difference, it'll get easier.
You mentioned greenways or a greenway or something like that. Do you see like an aggregated strength and resilience from connecting different projects in your area?
Yeah, so far with the forest, it hasn't happened yet because it's still so new. It's really just been within the last 10 years that there's been any effort to reforest the tropical dry evergreen forest. But the hope would be, I mean, because eventually we will have forested those 70 acres completely. So we are getting in touch now with landowners in adjacent areas to the forest and hoping they can get on board too. And we are seeing that start to happen a little bit. And especially having this international township, Oroville, so close. There are other projects that have started up in Oroville that are working with tropical dry evergreen forest too. So hopefully, you know, those corridors will start to develop, because really it's, you know, the native area, it's just a strip of between 30 and 50 kilometers inland. So if we were able even to just get a little strip, that would make a huge difference.
What's the vision for how this can scale to have a real large impact? Because 70 acres every 10 years is
Right.
a long time to cover the world.
Yeah, and I think you know, we've had a lot of interest from other organizations and people who've offered to donate land in so many other countries, that we do see a future for being able to be present in a lot of different places. The only thing we're lacking is the money to kind of get off the ground, and the manpower. So I think the approach that they take to reforestation at Sadhana Forest is as much about educating the people that come through and how to lead a sustainable life than even just the changes that they're making on the ground. So, you know, yes, it's a huge impact for the people who live within a 10-mile radius, who, you know, their bore wells have water in them again, but it's also the 1,000 volunteers from every corner of the world that come through every year, who are then taking those practices back to their own countries, some Western countries, but also we get a lot of volunteers from other developing countries too. So who are then, you know, able to take the wick irrigation system back home and teach someone else about it, or to introduce more people to the concept of veganism and how that can impact the environment. And so just the different practices that they've learned there, I see that as being more the large-scale impact, the commitment to community in a different way of living life. Yeah.
Have you been able to connect with any environmental studies programs or anything with colleges, I mean, like on a regular basis, where they're sending students over?
I personally haven't, but they do. There are a number of programs that go and send student groups and study abroad programs to live at Sadhana Forest in India for a semester. So we didn't have any groups during the 6 months that I was living there, but just before I was there, there's a program called Living Roots. I forget which university it goes through, but they send a group there that studies eco-villages every, I think twice a year. And I know there are a couple other groups from the States and then many other groups from Asia that sends both high school and college groups over there to study. But yeah, we'd love to get more. Yeah.
If the volunteers would need help here, say they're being accident or something like that, what do you do? Is there someplace close by, or?
Yeah, so we permanently have a volunteer who's been trained in providing immediate first aid locally, and then they've been there long enough that we do have a relationship with a couple of the hospitals in the larger town that's about 45 minutes away. So it's, you know, the matter of the person who's kind of trained there, it's just to evaluate the situation and recommend what the right course of action would be. The nearest town, it's a pretty, I mean, it's a city, it's a large city, and they have fairly good hospitals there for India standards.
define a gift economy?
So within the community, there's no money exchange, so you volunteer in exchange for food and housing as you can. People who come in with more money often will contribute or donate a certain amount to cover the cost of food. And all the volunteers who come through are encouraged to offer workshops or services or whatever they're good at in the afternoons, because most of the work we do is early in the morning to get it out of the way before the heat of the day. And so the afternoons are free for us to go into town, out with friends, or just to offer a workshop or attend a workshop in the community. Some people come in who are masseuses, and so they'll offer massages, but the idea is that whatever you offer, it's not in direct exchange for something else. It's the idea that if you have a service or a good that somebody else needs, if they need it more than you do, you give it to them with the expectation that someone else will then meet whatever needs you have, not necessarily a direct exchange from the person that you've provided the good or the service to. It's definitely an ideal more than a concrete practice, but it's an interesting way to kind of try to live. Yeah.
What percentage of your own food are you able to grow there?
It's a fairly small percentage at this point. We grow almost all of our own fruit, a lot of our own herbs and spices, some vegetables, lettuce, and the goal is eventually to grow all of our own. But the food that we do get is all from other Oroville farms, so farms that are associated with the International Township of Oroville, who grow all of their food organically and are also involved in kind of similar ecological projects. So all of our food is local within a 10 or 25-mile radius and is organic and vegan.
You mentioned some animals and birds are coming back, and you mentioned the water table is rising. What other benefits can you see or do you hope to see from reforestation?
The water table rising is huge. Not just because that it's providing more water, but it's allowing people to stay in the community, whereas before they were having to leave because their wells were dry. And when people can stay in the community, then it just opens up so many doors for development and different kinds of growth and keeping those people out of the city slums. So that's been kind of a huge shift that they've seen since they've been there. And as the people then are able to stay and they see the effects of it, they want to get involved with the project or come out on the weekends and check out what we're doing. But you can tell when you bike or drive around the area, just that picture that I showed that looked like where there was such terrible erosion, you really don't see that anymore in much of the area. It doesn't look different just in the area that we've reforested, but in the whole community around that, I never saw anything that looked like that. And so it's clear that the topsoil is coming back and people are able to grow more. Agriculture has picked up in the area. And even though it's still a relatively poor area, you get the sense that it's thriving a lot more than it was 10, 15 years ago.
Can you describe some of the food that you eat?
It's a pretty simple diet since we're doing all of our cooking for ourselves over fires. So a lot of rice, a lot of lentils, beans, beets, tomatoes, carrots, a lot of root vegetables. We eat a lot of salad.
Describe your granola that you made.
Yeah, I did try to make granola. Well, I made it twice actually, and people seem to like it. But the grains that we use are different than the grains that we have here. So, but I used a grain that was similar to oatmeal, and then mixed it with date syrup, jaggery, which is a natural form of cane sugar that we get over there, raisins, coconut. We eat a lot of coconut in South India. But when we use coconuts, it's literally we have to crack the coconut against a rock, drain the water, and then hand grate it. So for the granola, it took probably 4 or 5 grated coconuts, which for one person would take a couple of hours. Luckily, I had some friends helping me. And then kind of roast it up in one of those big pans over the fire. We make smoothies sometimes on the bicycle blender, which would be, we put in fruit, bananas, papaya, coconut milk. We make a lot of herbal teas with local spices, ginger tea, and like lemongrass tea, porridges. Yeah.
Are there enough flowers to support like honeybees or something like that? Or is that not even in the could they
I
exist
did
there?
not see I didn't see many bees. Trying to think if I saw. I think there is a project in Oroville that's producing honey. So there is an effort towards that. Yeah.
It's interesting when you say, power enough for your computers and that. So do you draw from like a tower or something in the city with the hospital, or how do you do your internet and that type of thing?
We do have an internet connection. So there is a Wi-Fi connection. It's incredibly slow and not very reliable at all. All of our electricity that we're not connected to the grid at all. So we only have the electricity that we're able to generate from the solar panels. And that is also what powers the internet.
So I'm not sure how much time you spent thinking along these lines, but I'm just curious if you, what do you think might be like the greatest threat to your endeavors as you try to grow the forest and grow your own economy at the same time and replace the economy that's been taken from land essentially with a more sustainable economy?
I mean, I think the main challenge is the desire of these countries that are developing to want to develop along the same lines that we've developed. And so when they look at a project like this where, some Indians will come to volunteer and they say, oh my gosh, you live the way that our grandparents did. This isn't the kind of future we want. They can't really, it's sad, but they can't develop the way that we have, especially with their population size. So that's a big challenge to get people on board. Volunteers who come from Western countries, it's a bit of a novelty, like, we're having this experience of back to the earth and everything. For them, it's not back to the earth, it's reality, and it's a reality that they want to escape. So it'll come down to really to education and changing thought processes about what development means and what progress means and what that can look like. And I think we're still kind of in the process of figuring that out, because not everyone does want to live that way and not everyone can. And so what can that look like in a more modern environment? What can these communities look like if one were going to start, here in the United States, where making those attempts to live sustainably, but also making sure that people are living comfortably too.
It's 8 o'clock. If anyone needs to go, feel free to go. I'm sure Mark will be happy to stick around and answer more questions. She hasn't mentioned it, but she is accepting donations. So if you're going to donate, please do.
It is tax deductible.
I hope to see you all next month, and please take a reusable grocery bag on your way out. So let's thank Lark.